If you're over print nightmare, but want to have a nightmare on a print challenge, then Objective 7 is for you. You have to perform a hash length extension attack on printer firmware using your own payload in order to hack a printer. This took me 2.5 to 3 hours to complete, and I definitely had to read a blog post from 2012 by Skull Security, specifically Ron Bowes, and utilize a tool that he created for this particular attack type called the hash extender tool. Specifically, if we're looking at something, an application is vulnerable to this type of attack if it prepends a secret value to a string, hashes it with a vulnerable algorithm, entrusts the attacker with both the string and hash, but not the secret, and if the server relies on this secret to decide whether or not data returned is the same as the original data. If you use HMAC, you can prevent this, as it's what HMAC is designed to prevent against. We move over to our Kali Linux VM in this particular challenge because we need to use a few tools that would only be available to us on a Linux-based system. We break up the challenge into 3 parts, the first being a successful hash length extension attack using the hash extender tool. Then we have to create a successful payload that, if we use this particular tool against to combine with a legitimate firmware, we will be able to upload to the printer to either get a reverse shell or some sort of access to a specific file that we need to view. At that point, once we view that specific file through whatever means necessary, we will have been able to complete the challenge. The file we need to view is var spool printer.log. So first off, we download the firmware export JSON file, and extract the base64 encoded firmware zip file. And this is stored under the key firmware, and it comes paired with a signature, secret length, and algorithm key, which we're going to need to use. We have to download the hash extender tool, and at this point, we fail big time. It wasn't compiled, it came with a Makefile, but guess what? I'm so stupid that I couldn't remember what to do with a Makefile. So I honestly had to Google run Makefile Linux, and I wound up on a how to run Make on Linux for Dummies page. This is no word of a lie. I just to get the tool, made with the command make. That's all I had to do was run make, and I had to figure out how to do that. So let's just simmer in that for a second. Anyway, I had issues with the hash extension as I was essentially doubling up also. I'd try to append my payload to the signed archive and then use the hash extender to append the original firmware with the original firmware already combined with my own firmware. This involved a lot of catting of files and double redirectors into files, and this was wrong and a big waste of my time. Eventually, I went and grabbed an alcoholic beverage because I was not faring well with this particular challenge, and I wanted to jog my creativity. I started to look at appending formats and how we had to read it in as raw. So I started to change how I was reading it into this particular tool. I threw away the old attempts to read file bytes in and did a lot of the heavy lifting with CyberChef. I read it in as raw, using essentially it converted to hex, pump it out as hex, and then go from hex to base64. To get it to work, the following pretty much had to occur. I would decode the base64 firmware from the zip file I retrieved, I would zip up a new payload, I would convert the signed firmware to hex by using CyberChef, hex, and find and replace all the spaces, and then I would convert my malicious firmware to hex also. I would then use the hash extender, pumping in the raw hex that I had converted, using the data format equals hex and the append format equals hex also. The secret is set to 16, which is what we get in our particular firmware file, and we're setting the signature as this long string, which is the signature. We set the format to SHA-256 and then set the out data format to hex. Then with the out format as hex, we can essentially do that in reverse and turn it into a base64 encoded string. We turn that base64 encoded string back into the JSON file that we have and attempt to upload it, and finally we are successful in uploading our bad firmware JSON file. At this point I was pretty tired, so I needed to sleep and take in what I've learned. I was going to try again another day when I was feeling fresh and coherent. The next day. Quickly realized that we are pretty rubbish at trying to exploit this thing. Something that I was thinking about and sort of had, I guess, someone say something that sort of jogged something in my brain is that when we're using this hash extender, we are essentially appending two files. So when we were doing this cat operation to essentially pump it into the existing zip firmware file, then we are going to be doubling that up by then extending it to itself onto the firmware file again, if that makes sense. No, that does not make sense. What the hell are you on about, man? Your brain needs more than jogging. So basically, the stuff that we want to append here should just be an archive that has our firmware in it and nothing else. And we're gonna call the firmware exactly the same. We're gonna call it like firmware.bin, because if we don't, well, maybe it's got some sort of checksum that is going to come down and or file name check that is essentially going to come down and prevent it from essentially uploading as firmware. Yeah, okay, that makes more sense. At this point, you may be thinking I'm in the right state of mind. I think this clip speaks for itself. What we're gonna do is we're gonna try to do this again because yeah, we've been a little bit rubbish, but it's okay because we've got our friend Beer here to help us out. Before you say anything, kids underage don't drink, and it is only Monday. Even though all hope may seem lost at this stage, we were actually on the right track. I tried to create a payload using Metasploit, some C code to run a bash reverse shell, and even just some code to copy a file somewhere I thought was readable. This did take a while, and I did go through a lot of different potential payloads. I set up some cloud infrastructure to receive a reverse shell and was determined to have this printer beacon back. At the end of the day, I wanted to get that reverse shell to be able to access this printer. Eventually, I gave up on using bash to connect back. Bash TCP reverse shell, I just gave up on it. And instead, I decided to compile some native C code to connect back to a netcat listener that I was running on my server. The only problem was, I didn't know how to do this off the top of my head, and I didn't want to go reinventing the wheel. But then, like a dove bringing the answer to me, I found some code on the internet! Woo! Yeah! Stealing stuff from GitHub which has already been stolen from somewhere else. So, thank you 0xAbeIO and Tech Organic Blog. You saved me anywhere from 10 minutes to 4 hours depending on how I was currently functioning and how advanced my Googling skills were on a given day. At this point, we go ahead and compile, ensuring that we have any compatibility measures in place by ensuring we use the TAC-WL and TAC-TAC hash TAC style equals both when compiling the C code. We redo what we've previously done and put this file back into a file called Firmware.JASOOON. Let's just sit back and hear my own live commentary as we try to upload this. JSON! So, now we've got Firmware.JSON file, we are going to upload it to this printer. I'm going to refresh the page here because I haven't done it since before, and I also don't know whether it's a single session or sort of what's going on. I'm going to do a firmware update. I'm going to confirm that I have just been kicked out of my particular infrastructure because it took me too long to basically do anything. I'm back into it. I'm setting up my listener again on 443. Let's browse to the firmware that we just created, the Firmware.JSON, and upload it. And we received the connection! We've got it! We got it! You actually can't see this though, because I'm currently not sharing that string. But to give you a bit of context, we have a box set up stood called Sync Me. So I'll show you what that currently looks like for me, and you'll get a bit more of an idea as to why I just got happy. So you can see here the connection. We've got a Ubuntu stood up infrastructure, and there is this connection received on this particular port. But now before you start lecturing me on the fact that yes, I'm logged in as root, I know, I'm logged in as root. It's okay, this is disposable infrastructure that I'm gonna get rid of it after I do this, but the important thing is we have a connection received, and if we do ls, we're on this particular printer. So we've got this config.ru as well, it'll be interesting. I don't know what that is, so let's see what it is. If we cat that, no idea. But the C file that we used and uploaded in this particular fashion works, so thank you 0xAbeTac.io. You have succeeded in helping us succeed at passing this challenge by uploading malicious firmware that is essentially executed by this thing. Now, before we actually forget exactly what we're doing here, I'm just going to double check, and once again, you can only see the one screen that I'm sharing, but let's go to look at the objective, because I'm sure there's something I need to do, not just get a shell and say, haha, yeah, I've got a shell. All right, so we've got varspul printer.log. That's the first thing I'm going to look for in this particular session. So let's do that. Cat -var or /var/spool /printer.log. And you can see we have some good documents for printing here. Now, the actual question was looking for an XLS. An XLS extension. What is the name of the last file printed with an XLSX extension? So we've just got that. We've got this shell, and we've actually got that. So this troll pay is what we're looking for. Now, if I go back to my particular virtual machine where I've got this running, you will be able to see that if we put this in and submit, wow, we've done it. We've completed the challenge. Yes, that's right. The power of alcohol means that we have done it in 11 minutes since thinking about it overnight, as opposed to the hours that we spent trying to do this previously.